right now, um, your brain is actively lying to you.
Oh, constantly.
Right. Just to protect your feelings, it's filtering reality, bending facts, and, clinging to outdated assumptions just to keep your internal world comfortable.
Yeah, which is completely exhausting.
It is. And according to the operations manual we are unpacking today, those little subjective lies, that constant emotional filtering, that is the exact reason you feel perpetually overwhelmed by the tidal wave of information in the modern world.
It's a state of chronic cognitive overload, really. I mean, the human mind simply was not evolved to ingest, sort, and verify the sheer density of data we encounter daily.
No, not at all.
We are trying to run a hyper-complex modern reality on legacy hardware that prioritizes emotional survival over objective accuracy.
Which is exactly why this deep dive is dedicated to a highly specific, radically uncompromising source document today. We are digging into the comprehensive framework for epistemological coherence and relational logic.
Specifically focusing on its expanded operations manual.
Right. Now, before we go any further, let's translate that title. I mean, epistemological coherence is basically a very precise academic way of saying, making sure the mechanisms of how you know things actually make sense together.
Exactly. And relational logic is how those verified facts connect without breaking.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to explore this manual's mechanical, almost algorithmic solution for processing reality. It's a system that promises to eliminate cognitive friction and help you build an unbreakable internal web of knowledge.
And algorithmic is definitely the operative word here. This document entirely bypasses vague self-help platitudes.
Oh, completely.
It approaches the human mind as a high-performance computational engine that is suffering from catastrophic memory leaks. And it provides the exact software patch required to achieve absolute structural integrity.
And the manual lays out this patch in phases, starting with phase 1, which establishes the absolute baseline. It introduces the concept of absolute truth, but it defines it with, brutal strictness.
It really does.
In this framework, absolute truth is data that possesses a strict, verifiable one-to-one correspondence with empirical external reality.
Independent of the observer.
Yes, entirely independent of subjective observation. It does not matter if you were looking at it. It does not matter how you feel about it. It simply is.
That independence from the observer is the foundational axiom. Reality is not a consensus, and it is certainly not a feeling.
Right.
To use a systems engineering analogy, the manual defines goodness not as a morality or ethics, but purely as structural integrity. Goodness is a state of perfect logical coherence with zero internal contradictions.
So zero flaws in the code.
Exactly. Think of compiling a massive millions of lines software code base. If there is a single syntax error, a single contradiction in the logic, the whole build fails.
Wow.
If you achieve zero contradictions, you reach the ultimate epistemic state the system calls certainty.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if truth is strictly this cold one-to-one correspondence with external physical reality, where does that leave you and me?
That is the big question.
Right. What happens to the very real pain, joy, or misperceptions we experience daily? I mean, we aren't silicon chips. Human emotion is a fundamental part of our operating system.
The framework deeply understands that, which is why it explicitly categorizes those experiences under the strict definition of illusion.
Illusion.
Yes. It does not mean your pain isn't felt. It means that subjective phenomena like biases, emotional narratives, fears, they are perceptual anomalies.
Okay.
The manual acknowledges they exist, but it demands you quarantine them. It absolutely refuses to let you treat an emotion as operational data to build your worldview upon.
And the reason it quarantines those illusions is to combat a specific failure mode the text calls expectation negligence, which honestly might be the most paradigm-shifting concept of the entire document.
What's fascinating here is how expectation negligence identifies the exact moment our cognitive structure begins to degrade.
Yeah.
It is defined as the failure to update our internal models when presented with new, conflicting external realities. We choose to rely on what we expect rather than what is.
Right, so think of expectation negligence like staring at the dashboard of your car while the engine overheats. The temperature gauge is completely pinned in the red, right? That is the empirical external reality.
But you refuse to pull over.
Exactly, because your internal model says, well, this is a reliable car. I just got it serviced. It never breaks down. You are literally choosing to believe your comfortable memory of the car over the physical smoke pouring out from under the hood.
That is a perfect illustration. Because tearing down an old mental model and building a new one requires immense caloric and cognitive energy.
It's exhausting.
Right. Biologically, we are lazy. We prefer the illusion of the reliable car because updating the model is stressful.
Yeah, we don't want to deal with it.
Exactly. But this framework explicitly forbids that laziness. It mandates continuous, instantaneous alignment between internal thought and external reality. When the world changes, your mind must update its model without hesitation or emotional resistance.
But wait, if we are mandating instantaneous alignment, we run into a major biological roadblock. I mean, forbidding expectation negligence sounds flawless on paper, but how do we practically do this?
Right, the actual execution.
Yeah, if we want to force our brains to constantly align with reality, we need a literal processing pipeline for the daily flood of data. Which brings us to phase two, the information processing pipeline.
Exactly. We have to move from theory to mechanics. How do we actually ingest the world without corrupting our internal database?
Well, the manual outlines step one as data ingestion and suspension. It demands that all incoming information must first be held in a suspended state.
Quarantined.
Right. You have to strip it entirely of subjective emotional framing and treat it as unverified raw data, neither true nor false. But I have to push back here on the biological feasibility of this.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
I mean, think about how difficult that is for you listening right now. How hard is it to strip your emotional framing from a piece of news or an interpersonal conflict before you even test it? Your amygdala fires and floods your system with cortisol before your prefrontal cortex even boots up to analyze the situation.
It's an instant physiological response.
Exactly. So how does the manual expect a human being to mechanically achieve this without just completely repressing their natural psychology?
It's a crucial distinction, actually. The manual does not tell you to stop the amygdala from firing. You cannot stop the physiological response.
Okay, so it accepts the biology.
Yes. What the suspension protocol demands is a decoupling of the data from the reaction. You let the cortisol flood your system, but you consciously recognize the emotion as a separate quarantined event.
Oh, interesting.
So you look at the incoming data, say an aggressive email from a colleague, and you actively enforce a mental tag. You say, this is merely text on a screen. My elevated heart rate is an internal illusion. The data itself is currently unverified. You are overriding the system not by suppressing feeling, but by categorizing the feeling as non-operational.
You essentially build a mental sandbox to hold the data while the alarm bells ring outside of it.
Precisely.
And once it is safely suspended in that sandbox, we move to step two, the falsifiability and coherence test. It's a dual-layered checkpoint.
Layer 1 is empirical verification. Can this data map directly to an objective physical reality?
Right.
And layer 2 is logical coherence. Does this new data conflict with any previously established node of absolute truth in your system? It must pass both.
Which triggers step three, the binary sorting protocol. And there are no maybes here, no gray areas. The data is either subjected to the addition protocol or the subtraction protocol.
It's ruthless.
It really is. If it passes the dual test, it's accurately added. If it fails either one, if it is unverified or contradictory.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the absolute uncompromising nature of the subtraction protocol is the true genius of the system's defense mechanism.
Because it doesn't just ignore it.
Exactly. When data fails, you don't just tentatively set it aside or agree to disagree with it. It is classified permanently as misinformation. The mechanism here involves actively recognizing it as a pathogen.
A pathogen, yeah.
You do not allow it to mingle with your verified facts because integrating even a fraction of unverified data corrupts the entire structural integrity of your knowledge base.
But if we are ruthlessly deleting all this bad data using the subtraction protocol, the traditional ways we organize our minds suddenly become entirely useless.
They break down completely.
Right, because we usually use mental filing cabinets. We have a conceptual box for work stuff, a box for politics, a box for relationships.
Set at categories.
Yeah, but if we're stripping away context and emotion, those boxes don't work anymore. We just have a pile of verified facts. So how does the framework suggest we store them?
By fundamentally destroying the concept of the box.
Destroying the box.
Yes. Phase 3 introduces relational mapping architecture. The manual argues that static categorization, the whole box method, it limits the utility of information. Instead of dropping facts into isolated folders, the framework shifts to a dynamic network topology.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
Well, verified pieces of information become nodes. These are discrete, unalterable facts existing in an open conceptual space.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the contrast between how we currently think and what this manual proposes is staggering. Think of the old box method, like a clunky gray filing cabinet.
Very rigid.
Extremely rigid. You learn a fact about human psychology, you shove it in the psychology drawer, and it's just trapped there. But this new dynamic network, it is more like a starry constellation or an interactive three-dimensional graph database.
Yes, exactly.
The nodes are just floating in open space. What gives them meaning are the edges.
Right. The edges are the relational vectors. They are the logical bindings that connect the nodes.
The relationships between the facts.
Yes. An edge defines the relationship. So it says node A causes node B, or node C operates parallel to node D, or even node E is a prerequisite for node F.
So instead of a fact sitting dead in a folder, its entire value is defined by how it lights up and connects to other facts across your entire map of reality.
The technical term the manual uses for this is state plasticity.
State plasticity.
Yeah, and it functions similarly to dynamic memory allocation in computing, or even neural plasticity in the brain. Because there are no rigid walls, a single node isn't trapped in the single context.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Let's say you empirically verify a node regarding the physics of fluid dynamics. In a traditional box system, that just sits uselessly in a science folder.
All right.
But through state plasticity, that exact same node can project an edge to your understanding of economic capital flow, and another edge to how crowds move through a subway station, and maybe a third to how data travels through a network. The node itself never changes, and it is never duplicated or moved. It just powers multiple conceptual models simultaneously based purely on its logical relationships.
It eliminates so much cognitive redundancy. Your mind evolves into this hyper-efficient, glowing, interconnected web of absolute truth.
It's a beautiful model.
It is. But let's bring this back down to earth for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Having this pristine intellectual web is an incredible ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But human reality is deeply chaotic. We don't live in a sterile laboratory.
Unfortunately not.
We are bombarded by shifting, complex, highly emotional scenarios every single hour. So how do you maintain this delicate network of nodes and edges without it just shattering the moment you step outside?
You maintain it by treating the framework not as a philosophy, but as a continuous operational state.
A constant process.
Yes, that is the purpose of Phase 4 coherent handling steps. It's the procedural guide. You have to actively run these maintenance protocols in real time.
And step 1 of Phase 3 is establishing the observational anchor. The manual directs that whenever you experience confusion or conflict or cognitive dissonance, you must immediately halt data processing and trace the problem back to fundamental axioms.
You have to find solid ground.
Right. If you are in a heated, tangled argument with a partner, you don't try to untangle the emotional mess from the middle. You drop an anchor at the most undeniable axiom. You strip it back to, we are two humans in a room, we both desire a resolution. These specific words were spoken at this exact time.
You anchor to the empirical reality, and from there, you proceed to step 2, identifying the boundary.
Drawing a line.
Exactly. You must explicitly, consciously define the hard line separating objective mechanism from subjective perception. On one side of the boundary is the verifiable sequence of events. On the other side is the illusion. You know, what you feared their tone meant or what you felt their intention was.
And clearly, drawing that boundary makes step 3 possible. Execute the subtraction sequence. And I have to say, reading the precise mechanics of this step, it is incredibly liberating.
It really takes the weight off.
It does. The manual instructs you to actively void the noise. Identify the assumptions, the unverified claims, the emotional projections, and just discard them. But the profound part is the specific instruction: do not attempt to integrate them or make sense of them.
That directive completely subverts human nature. I mean, we are meaning-making machines. We desperately want to understand why someone acted irrationally.
Exactly. Think about how much energy you, the listener, waste trying to rationalize a colleague's totally illogical behavior, or trying to piece together a contradictory, sensationalized news story to find the hidden truth.
It's exhausting.
The manual frees you from that burden. It tells you, if it is unverified noise, void it.
Yeah.
It is not your responsibility to make nonsense make sense. By simply dropping the corrupt data, the amount of processing power you save is monumental.
Because attempting to integrate nonsense is precisely what introduces contradictions and degrades your structural integrity.
Right.
So once you have successfully voided the noise, you move to step 4, map the surviving data. You take the accurate information that survived the gauntlet and you query its function. You ask, what does this actually do? What is its mechanism?
And you map it into your network.
Yes, by forging new edges to your existing nodes.
But you aren't finished. You cannot just drop a new node into this complex web and hope for the best. you have to execute step 5, system-wide recalibration.
This raises an important question regarding the mechanics of recalibration. When a new truth is mapped, how do we guarantee it hasn't introduced a hidden contradiction that breaks the logic 3 layers deep?
Right, because everything is connected now.
Exactly. This is why system-wide recalibration functions almost like a blockchain consensus mechanism. You don't just check the immediate connections, you follow the edges outward from the new node, running a query across the entire topology.
Just scanning the whole web.
Yes, to ensure the new fact aligns mathematically with everything else you know to be true.
It's a continuous system-wide logic audit. If the logic holds and 0 contradictions are found anywhere in the network, then your internal ideal of reality synchronizes perfectly with the external whole.
It's a flawless match.
And that exact synchronization is what restores that ultimate, unshakable state of certainty.
It represents a profound evolution in how one experiences existence. It transitions a person from being a passive, overwhelmed consumer of chaotic information to an active, precise architect of their own cognitive structure.
So what does this all mean? For you, navigating your life right now, it presents a stark choice in how you handle that exhausting flood of daily information.
It really does.
You can continue operating on legacy hardware. You can let your mind remain a collection of messy, overflowing folders where empirical facts and subjective anxieties are all jammed together, constantly triggering expectation negligence.
Or you can patch the software.
Exactly. You can start visualizing your knowledge as an active, dynamic network of verified nodes. You can practice the subtraction protocol in your daily life, actively granting yourself permission to void the noise and stop trying to make sense of the nonsensical.
However, if we truly commit to the uncompromising mechanics of this relational logic, it leaves us with a deeply provocative implication.
Oh, what's that?
Well, the framework is explicitly designed as an internal manual for an individual's structural integrity. It relies on the assumption that external reality is objective.
Right, one-to-one correspondence.
But consider this. What happens if 2 people, both perfectly and rigorously running this exact relational logic framework, end up with completely different networks?
Wait, how would that happen if they're both flawless?
Because their baseline empirical verifications of an event might differ simply because they had different sensory access or vantage points?
Oh, wow, that completely flips the script. They're both operating with 0 contradictions, fully mapped nodes, absolute structural certainty, but their maps of reality are fundamentally incompatible.
Exactly. So does this dynamic network topology eventually demand that human minds must network together, like creating edges between separate human architectures to cross-reference baselines and achieve a society-wide, system-wide certainty? Or is perfectly logical, absolute truth doomed to remain an isolated island, trapped perfectly inside a single mind?
That is the ultimate paradox of processing reality. As you face your own tidal wave of data today, try to catch your own expectation negligence in real time. Notice when you are trying to force a newly verified reality into an outdated box just to stay comfortable. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep mapping your realities, keep interrogating those edges, and whatever you do, ruthlessly subtract the noise.